With cool tech like keyless entry and keyless start, an extremely light construction, and convenient home charging, this is the story of the General Motors EV1, an all-electric car that gobbled up as much as $500 million in development costs, was made from the ground up as a standalone EV, and meant to show the world what good old GM was capable of. But in the end, it all came crumbling down, quite literally. So stick around until the end of this video to find out the story of the controversial GM EV1, the first ever vehicle to wear the General Motors nameplate, and at the same time a car that was supposed to kickstart passenger electric vehicles for the masses in the early 1990s. Towards the end of the 1980s, General Motors was doing pretty well. In fact, it was one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world, but it was churning out not so special models like these, which definitely didn't help the brand image-wise. So, in a bid to show the whole world that GM was still a big player in the technology game, it entered the grueling 1987 Trans-Australian World Solar Challenge with a solar car named Sun Racer. The Americans won that race and figured that a passenger vehicle powered by electricity wouldn't be such a bad idea. So in 1990, General Motors presented the Impact, an all-electric working prototype made by AeroVironment, an American defense contractor and specialist in electric vehicles like unmanned drones. It was a peculiar-looking car, but the base was set for what was to become a PR disaster in the following years. Interest for the Impact EV was overwhelmingly positive, and the American carmaker planned on producing at least 5,000 of them in the following years. It was, after all, an electric car that looked like, well, a car. Unlike the other EVs that were available at the time, this thing was actually drivable, had 2 comfortable seats and plenty of storage in the trunk. But get this, the Impact's impact was so big in 1990 that California's Air Resources Board thought, hey, how about we force the biggest car manufacturers in the United States to make at least 2% of their vehicles zero emissions by 1997. GM seems to have an idea of what it takes to make an EV, so surely the others will follow. If the brands couldn't satisfy this demand, they wouldn't be allowed to sell any of their cars in the state of California anymore, one of the biggest markets in the USA at the time, but also the territory with the poorest air quality in America. In other words, both the car manufacturers and the state of California had something to gain from this seemingly simple mandate. So in 1994, General Motors began the preview program, where 50 hand-built Impact electric cars would be lent out to drivers for 1 to 2 weeks. Those who volunteered had to own a garage where a high current charger could be installed, and they had to agree that their experiences with the cars would be logged. Expectations were very low. GM thought no more than 80 people would register their interest in the Los Angeles area, but eventually the lines were closed after no less than 10,000 people called in. The same thing happened in New York, where 14,000 callers wanted to get a taste of the future of motoring. It's safe to say then that GM had a winner on its hands, right? Well, not exactly. Company officials started to cast doubt on the success of their own product, with a New York Times article stating that General Motors is preparing to put its electric vehicle on the road and planning for a flop. In case you weren't really paying attention, here's what happened up until this point. GM won the Trans-Australian Solar Car Race in 1987, then it made a cool-ish EV prototype called Impact in 1990. This prototype apparently got the hopes of California legislators so high that they made a law requiring car makers to have at least 2% of total sales made up of zero-emissions vehicles by 1997. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to sell anything in California anymore. After this announcement, GM started to second-guess the future success of the Impact. Okay, now that we're on the same page, let's continue, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Apparently, it really matters in YouTube's algorithm. After GM's position change in regards to its own EV, other car manufacturer officials started voicing their concerns about the people's interest in electric cars. But nevertheless, work continued, and in 1996 the Impact became the EV1, the first ever vehicle to wear the General Motors nameplate instead of a brand name like Chevrolet. 660 cars were initially made, and they were all equipped with lead-acid batteries made by Delco, which offered a range of around 60 to 70 miles per charge. Not great, not terrible. These Delco-made batteries were later upgraded to Panasonic-made units, which increased the range to 110 miles per charge. As for charging, it was really simple. You just had to put the MagneCharger wireless plug in the front of the car, and that was it. No CCS, CHAdeMO or supercharger ports to mess with. But even if range wasn't anything to write home about, the tech used was really cool and interesting, especially considering the year we're talking about. The EV1 had keyless entry and start, with the driver having to input a PIN code to unlock the car and start it. A key was available, but it was an optional extra. Moreover, even though it was powered by a lot of heavy lead-acid batteries, GM's EV weighed less than 1.4 tons or 2,800 pounds, which is really impressive even in today's EV world. The structure was made out of aluminum, the wheels were magnesium alloy, and the body was plastic, or as period journalists put it, corrosion-resistant non-metal. Granted, the interior didn't exactly scream quality. I mean, just look at that plastic flex, and it only seated 2 people. But it had cool displays, a million buttons on the dash, and it was a real, decently performing 137 horsepower electric car that almost anyone could drive. I say almost anyone because the EV1 was only leased, never sold, and only in California and the Southwest through a select network of Saturn dealers. In 1999, General Motors released the so-called Gen 2 version of the EV1, which was lighter than the previous Gen 1 model and eventually featured nickel metal hydride batteries that increased the range to a maximum of 140 miles or 230 kilometers. The Gen 2 model was produced in 457 units and leased for prices ranging from $349 to $574 per month, depending on the city and incentives at the time. Reception of the EV1 was generally good, with allegedly thousands of people registering their interest for a lease contract. But even so, in 1999, the same year in which the Gen 2 EV1 was released, General Motors shut down the assembly line, with the EV1 continuing to be leased until 2002. And now you might be wondering, why? It was pretty obvious that people wanted to buy and drive this thing, but GM wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea. So it decided to remove all EV1s from the road and simply crush them. Around 40 of them got their drivetrains removed and were donated to schools and museums across the country, and just one remains in working conditions, at least officially, and is on display at the Smithsonian Museum. Remember that California law that started all of this? It was modified after the EV1 entered production, and manufacturers weren't required to sell a certain number of zero-emissions vehicles anymore, at least at the time, that is. So, citing a lack of interest from the general public and immense costs, General Motors simply refused to sell the cars to those who leased them. On the other side of the story, there's the argument that GM simply wanted a way out of the obligation to supply spare parts for 15 years after the cars were sold, and that the car maker didn't want to render obsolete billions of dollars invested into internal combustion engines. The truth is, I don't know what the real reason behind the abrupt killing of the EV1 was, but I'm pretty sure it had a lot to do with money. Considering the monthly lease was around $400, it's clear that GM lost money on every single EV1 made, so it didn't make sense from a financial standpoint to keep making it. but it remains an important bullet point in the history of modern electric cars, and I just have to wonder how much quicker the EV world would have moved if the EV1 would have been kept in production and upgraded over time. But what do you think? Did GM have a chance to be today's Tesla if it poured more money into the EV1? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified when we post new videos. And another thing, if you even managed to get this far in the video, this is my last appearance on Motorheads, and I just want to thank all of you who subscribed, commented and encouraged me to continue making quality car videos on YouTube. But now it's time for me to move on to other projects. It's been a fun ride and I enjoyed every second of it. I'm not sure what will happen with this channel, but hopefully another host will soon get to work and start making videos about cool and interesting car stories again. Thanks for watching.